Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 9 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans podcast. I am your host, Rick Verbanis, and I am joined by my partner, Bob Lucius. Bob, how's it going?
Man, it's going great, Rick. I can't believe we're almost through what 9 of these. It's incredible.
I know, right? It's time flies when you're having fun, and we've been having a lot of fun. So it's been great, and thanks to all the listeners out there. We appreciate the fact that you guys are not only listening, but you're subscribing, in some cases supporting, you're calling in, you're leaving messages, you're rating. Thanks so much for that. It's been a lot of fun, and we're going to continue to keep doing this. And this episode is going to be a little different. This episode, we're going to do a top 10 list. And speaking of feedback from the listeners, one of our members of our Facebook group, the Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group, his name is Stephen W. Penimpede, and he's a great member on there, contributes a lot. He did leave a recommendation on doing a top 10 list, and he gave a couple thoughts, and we figured, yeah, absolutely. And we got a lot of feedback from the members in the Facebook group, and several people left messages, which we'll get to in this particular episode. When we're talking about a top 10 list, right, there's certainly all different kinds that we can do, but we figured, hey, let's start with the one I think that everybody wants to hear and chime in on, and that is the top 10 Captain America villains. However, do we really need to include Red Skull in this? Isn't he number one, hands down? Is there any debate on that, Bob?
No, I don't think there is. I think Red Skull exists in a category of his own, and in fact, I think he would demand it.
Yes, exactly. And maybe we'll do that one day. We're certainly going to be talking about Red Skull plenty, but not in this episode, because I think it's we all understand he's number one. So this is our top 10 Captain American villains that are not named Red Skull. And so let's talk about the criteria, right? Let's talk about what it takes to make this top 10 list. So for me, I'm saying that, they can't just be a flash in the pan, right? They need staying power. They need to be someone who's been a thorn in Captain America's side for quite some time. And I'm not saying one and dones aren't great villains, because they can be. It's just not the criteria I'm looking for in the top 10.
Yeah. And I think that's a reasonable criteria, right? Because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of villains that have crept into Captain America lore over the years, but we're really interested, I think, in those that have really, as you said, been a thorn in Cap's side.
Right, and also let's another part of the criteria is it's just individuals only, right? Groups out there have been absolutely big time part of the Captain America mythos. Groups like Hydra, AIM, later on groups like the Serpent Society, even the Watchdogs, right? There's plenty of groups out there that we could explore, but we just want to stick with the individuals.
Yeah. Again, another reasonable criteria. Absolutely. And I got to tell you, I think another criteria is, and it's a squishy one, I admit this, that we differentiate between villains and bad guys, and I do think there's a difference, Rick. I think a villain is somebody with an evil intent, an evil heart, and is irredeemable. But bad guys sometimes they cross over the line into villainy, but bad guys don't necessarily have an evil intent. They just have a criminal mind. So, and there's been plenty of bad guys over the years, and bad girls, I should say, that have crossed over to the good side. And so I think it's important that we differentiate between bad guys and bad girls and villains.
Well, that'll be interesting. I guess we could kind of touch on that as we go through who we feel makes the top 10 list, and whether they are truly evil villains or just, as you mentioned, bad guys or bad girls, and a nod to the Mark Gruenwald Bad Girls group that he created too.
Yeah.
And I would say one last criteria is let's not pick people who are eventual allies, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sure, there's an argument you could say, John Walker, super patriot, becomes the Captain America replacement, but come on, he's eventually an ally. Same thing with Diamondback. Same thing with Winter Soldier, right? Yes, I could see an argument, but for our purposes, eventual allies, we're not going to include.
Yeah. No, I think that's a wise filter right there.
Okay. So let's before we get into the top 10, there are going to be characters that are close, right? Honorable mentions, if you will.
Yeah.
If you're listening through our top 10, and we're going to start at 10 and work our way to number 1, and your vote for someone isn't in there, stick around. They may make it into our honorable mentions. We'll go through those after we go through the top 10. Now, before we get into number 10, I want to play. We got a call in, and somebody is actually saying why they should be part of this top 10 group.
Allez, c'est pourri. How can you have the list of the greatest foes of Captain America and not include Batroc the Leaper? I am the greatest foe Steve Rogers has ever gone toe-to-toe with. This is known, and it does not matter how many times I lose. I am the greatest. Now watch it all as I bound away. Leap, leap, flip.
Shameless self-promotion. I would expect nothing less. From Batroc.
Awesome. And I could picture, because that's what he did, right? When he left in the early issues of Captain America, he would, as he was leaping away, he would say, leap. Shout out to John Waller Sewell. He recorded that, and with his apologies to the French everywhere for his accent. But John's a member of our Facebook group and listens to the podcast as well. And the other thing about John, if you want to check him out, he started a few years ago a comic anthology called Beautiful, Silly, and Terrible Things, and it's an anthology with different artists, and he's one of the writers. So fun stuff there too. So thanks, John. All right, now we actually did get someone call in to state their case, why they feel Batroc should make it in. And so let's go ahead and just let the listeners know. Number 10 coming in on our list is Batroc the Leaper. And here is the case from Heath Brown.
Hi, this is Heath Brown, and I'm recording this to state my case for Batroc the Leaper to make the list of Captain America's top villains. Now, I know that Batroc isn't necessarily brought up in the same conversations as Thanos or the Red Skull. He's not one of the hyper-powered villains, but this is a normal human, a normal guy who's just so strong and so agile and such a master of savate, which is a French martial art of kickboxing, that he's constantly a thorn in Cap's side. He stands toe-to-toe with Cap. He's defeated Cap on multiple occasions. He even once led a group of villains called Batroc's Brigade to steal Cap's shield. And he's just really been a long time thorn in Cap's side and always presented a big challenge for Captain America.
So that was Heath Brown, who is one of our moderators in the Captain America Comic Fans Facebook group. So Heath does a great job there, and we appreciate him calling in and stating his case for Batroc. And he mentions that he's just a normal person, but granted he does have Olympic level athletic prowess. Apparently, his leg muscles are extremely developed, so capable of leaping up to 10 feet in a single bound. So he does stand toe to toe, no pun intended, when he does fight hand to hand Captain America, and he has this lower body strength that's very impressive. He could kick through brick walls or shatter guns with a foot stamp. So he's definitely a hand-to-hand combatant that is somebody that can go up against Cap. So that's interesting. But I think, does Batroc fall underneath villain or bad guy here?
Yeah, that's a tough call, Rick. I got to tell you, I was surprised he made the list because, in my view, I think of Batroc as a bad guy. I wouldn't mind having a beer with Batroc. He gets involved in some shady stuff, and these days I think he'd make a heck of a lot more money as a mixed martial artist, than he does, because he never seems to be able to pull off some of the capers that he's up to.
That's a good.
Thanks. Yeah, but I think, and as well as I do, and we've covered this in some of our previous podcasts, that there's been some occasions where he's done the honorable thing. So I think he's a bad guy, but I don't know about villain, but I love him. I love the character.
I hear what you're saying. I'm gonna say he is that borderline bad guy villain. I think he makes the top 10 villain. He is number 10. And you're right. He has switched sides to fight alongside Cap several times. We pointed this out when reviewing the Bloodstone hunt in episode 3, when Batroc came to the aid of Cap against the Sharks. And he also has occasionally switched sides, fighting with him against Hydra, or even Mr. Hyde. And I think one of the John Byrne issues, Roger Stern issues. But he has done some bad stuff too. I mean, he did side with Hydra during the whole Cap Hydra storyline, and stood idly by while some bad things happened. He didn't interfere. So yeah, he is an interesting character. The Batroc's Brigade were always kind of interesting too. I think the first one had the Swordsman, the Living Laser. Then he had one with the Porcupine and Whirlwind. Then he eventually had one with Zaran and Machete. I think that's what Heath was talking to when he went and tried to go steal the shield. So, he's put himself in place where he's been with a lot of villains as well. But yep, he makes our number 10. And by the way, I forgot to mention, his first appearance was way back in March of 1966. So that was before Cap had his own series, and he was part of Tales of Suspense. So it was number 75, Tales of Suspense 75, when he came out. So he's definitely in here for having that.
That's some longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So next on our list is number 9. And Bob, maybe you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think number 9 on the list is, he's one of those villains who, he hasn't had a lot of appearances, but the appearances that he's had have been pretty seminal to the Cap mythos. And I just, every time I see this guy show up, it's a story that I love. And so it's none other than the Cap of the 1950s, who later, as you know, became the Grand Director, and ultimately, we know is William Burnside, although not until much later. So this guy, we reviewed the Captain America story arc where the Cap of the 1950s fought Steve Rogers' Captain America, and that was a great arc. That's one of my favorites, and that's often considered 153 the first appearance of the Cap of the 1950s. But as you know, it's been retconned. Right? So the original appearance, if you count the retcon, was way back in Young Men 24, back in the 1950s. But that's not been the only appearance of the Cap of the 1950s, because he popped up later as the Grand Director, as the head of the National Force in issue 231. Now, personally, I thought, well, that was sort of a weak appearance because he really came off as a weak pawn of Dr. Faustus. But really, where he came into his own, I think, was in the Brubaker-Epting run, issues 37 through 40, where, with the help of Sharon Carter, of all people, he escaped from Dr. Faustus once again and went toe-to-toe with the Winter Soldier, who by then we knew was Bucky Barnes. But ultimately, it was the issue 602 to 605, the Two Americas arc, that I think where he really became just a great villain. Not because not on the level of, say, a Red Skull or some of the other folks that we've talked about, because this guy wasn't necessarily evil. He's just warped. And that warpedness, that brokenness of the Cap of the 1950s, William Burnside, is what makes him a great villain, because he thinks he's doing the right thing, even as he's doing the wrong thing. And I think that's what makes this guy so interesting, and what brings him in at number 9 on our top 10 villain list.
So, Bob, don't most villains think they're doing the right thing? I mean, don't they all see themselves as a hero in their own minds, that they feel like they're doing the right thing? I mean, that doesn't make them any less like villainous, right? Or any
right.
I think, I mean, you mentioned the Grand Director when he came back as that under Dr. Faustus. I mean, he was essentially leading a Nazi white supremacist group, and I don't think that was him being warped. I think that was something that he was instilled with when he was back in the 1950s. I think that was part of who his essence was. I mean, it's kind of like saying, well, hey, I'm not really a racist, but when I drink too much, I make those kind of jokes. Well, no, yeah, I get it, but it came out because it was already there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I know he was warped in the fact that he didn't get the Vita rays, right? So that was the part that kind of drove them insane. But to some of the things that I think makes him villainous, I think we're already there.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, you've made several good points there. And I don't know if I can refute that, other than I would say that I think a lot of villains, they may not necessarily admit that they're doing the bad thing, but I think they would admit that they're doing it for themselves, for their own gain, for their own power, for their own accumulation of wealth, whatever. I don't think Cap of the 1950s, William Burnside, necessarily does it for himself. I think he thinks he's doing it for the greater good. He's just doing it in a warped way.
Well, I think a few of the villains that show up on the remainder of our top 10 fall into that same category. They think they're doing it for the right reasons. And we'll get to that.
All right.
So that was number 9, Grand Director, William Burnside, the Cap from the 50s. So number 8 is, I'm going to go ahead and let one of our listeners introduce number 8 on our list.
Hello, my name is Ash. I wanted to voice my thoughts about the top 10 best Captain America villains. Number 1 for me is definitely Sin. I think she's a very underrated character. She's graceful, evil, and her relationship and partnership with Crossbones is entertaining to read. I personally hope that I get to see more of her in future issues.
All right. Well, actually,
yeah,
that was Ash Hit, but in the Facebook group, she's known as Ash Barnes. So thanks, Ash, for calling in, and we appreciate that. You bring up a very good point. So yeah, number 8 on our list is Cynthia Schmidt, also known as Sin for short. She has been known also as Mother Night back earlier in when she was introduced, and she is no other than the daughter of Red Skull. So interesting. I don't know if I don't know if I would have described her as graceful, but that's an interesting point of view. I didn't think of that. She's also, I mean, she first appeared back in February of 1984 in Captain America 290, and she's had several aliases over the years, Bob. So she's been Mother Superior. during the story where it was Fear Itself, she became a character called Skadi, if I'm pronouncing that right. She's been known as the Beast Goddess, the Avatar of Evil, and the Heir of the Devil. So I'm going to go with villain over bad guy,
Yeah.
bad gal here. So just a little bit background on her. So, back in the day when Red Skull was trying to have a male heir, he fathered a daughter with a washerwoman, and the woman died of childbirth, and he almost killed the child because, it wasn't a boy as he was looking for. But one of his followers, someone by the name of Susan Scarborough, convinced him to not kill the baby and that she would raise the girl herself. And so the Skull agreed, left the girl, Cynthia, to be raised by Scarborough. And so Scarborough had indoctrined her into the Red Skull view of as she was growing up. So the Skull then returned when Cynthia was just a child, and put her in a special machine that accelerated her aging process until she was an adult and gave her superhuman powers. So now, as Mother Superior, Cynthia became the leader of a group called the Sisters of Sin. And it was basically a bunch of young orphan girls who were also accelerated into adulthood and given powers by the Red Skull. So there was that story that happened, Mark Grunwald's story early on. And it was interesting. I mean, the Sisters of Sin. Eventually, they were reverted to children. And later, Scarborough, who took on the role of Mother Night, reformed the Sisters of Sin and took the de-aged Cynthia and named her Sister Sin. So Cynthia was later captured by S.H.I.E.L.D., reprogrammed to a normal American girl with false memories. And so when the Red Skull was assassinated by the Winter Soldier, one of the orders was for Crossbones to break into the facility, kidnap Cynthia, and he tortured her to break the S.H.I.E.L.D. conditioning. And so afterwards, they kind of entered into a relationship, and Cynthia decided to call herself just Sin, and the two of them went on this killing spree, right? I mean, she totally is evil, just like Crossbones.
Yeah.
And just went around and killing people, and
They make a nice couple, though.
they really do. Yeah. Later during a battle, there was an explosion, and Sin's face was left severely disfigured and scarred, leaving her a Red Skull appearance. And he was institutionalized, but of course broke out. At this point, she's taken the Black Widow, Sam Wilson, hostage, and then tried to disrupt the trial of Bucky, Captain America, and demanded Bucky. So she ends up working with Baron Zemo. They retrieve the Book of the Skull. They figure out the whereabouts of a hammer that the Skull basically hid back in 1942, and it's a long, convoluted story. But the whole Fear Itself was essentially she was part of that. And later on, she teamed up with Zemo to defame when Sam Wilson was the Falcon, and was fairly successful at that, and claimed that she was better than the father. That she was the real and only Red Skull while he was gone. So she's been that thorn in not only Cap's side, but all versions of Cap, right? The Bucky version of Cap, the Sam Wilson version of Cap. And she is quite evil, as far as she kills without any remorse.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think she qualifies as one of the top 10 villains. I think that was a good selection by Ash.
Yeah. And we somehow managed to get Red Skull somewhat back on the list by
by proxy.
Yes. Okay. So number 7, who do we have?
Oh, number 7. I love this guy, the Flag Smasher, Carl Morgenthau, or as he describes himself in issue 348, he is the anti-patriot. Now, I don't know if, we're going to talk about the Flag Smasher story arc, the original Flag Smasher story arc, I think, in an upcoming podcast. But this guy appeals to me because, I like sort of these sort of meta-thematic villains that are an antithesis of Cap. And so this guy, he fits that bill in spades. Now, his first appearance was in Captain America 312. And I think that was a one-issue story that naturally ended with his defeat. But he popped up again in other story arcs from time to time. Notably, I think in 321 and 322 as the head of Ultimatum. Yeah, the underground, liberated, totally integrated mobile army to unite mankind. Now that is awesome,
I'm sorry. Can you please spell out the acronym for ultimatum one more time? Because
Yeah,
I don't know if I got all of that.
yeah. The underground, liberated, totally integrated mobile army to unite mankind.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. That is an awesome. I worked in government for decades. It's acronym soup all the time. But that one is it is the penultimate acronym.
Yes.
Ultimatum.
I tip my hat because Mark, he was a lover of comics for so long. I think that was his nod to all the 60s and 70s acronyms, Shield and MODOK and all
Right.
AIM, right?
Yeah.
An acronym. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think when he was sitting there and that came up in his mind, he had a good chuckle over that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, if you want to read some of the best Captain America speechifying, it's in the final pages of issue 322 when he's lecturing Flag Smasher. But I digress. So anyway, Flag Smasher comes back in issues 348 to 349, where he's gone rogue from Ultimatum. Basically, he's given Ultimatum his ultimatum, and he's left because he's discovered that Ultimatum is being financed by who? The Red Skull, right? So there we go. Red Skull makes his way back into the top 10 villain list by proxy.
Get rid of him.
Yeah, and what does he do? He captures John Walker, who at this point is Captain America, right? And in order to lure Steve Rogers at the time, the captain, to his Arctic fortress there, where he needs Cap's help, right? The Red Skull through the ultimatum is trying to use this magneto pulse generator to wipe out technology. So again, Red Skull can fulfill his plan of taking over society. And I think, issue 348 has some of the best action shots where Flag Smasher is fighting John Walker as Captain America. Any action shots. The Dwyer has done some fabulous work there. So, why does Flag Smasher deserve to be on this list? And again, it goes back to that meta theme. I think I like the fact that he's the anti-patriot. This is a guy who thinks he's doing the right thing as well. He thinks he's.
There you go. So I know brand director. We talked about that, right?
Yeah, right.
Definitely a case of somebody who doesn't think they're evil and that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, he's trying to help people and help society. But he is the antithesis of Cap, and he provides a great foil to Cap, because Cap stands for the embodiment of American principles, right? I mean, that's what he stands for, the American dream and the principles upon which America was founded. Even if we don't always live up to those principles and we're constantly striving to perfect them, Cap stands for the perfection of those principles. And in that way, the Flag Smasher is different than, say, the 1950s Cap, who was truly the mirror opposite of Captain America Steve Rogers in many ways. So, I mean, that's why I think Flag Smasher is such an interesting and provocative sort of villain, and why I think he deserves to be number 7 on our list.
Well, when you put it that way, got to say, Flag Smasher's a pretty nice guy with good intentions if you just take out all the terrorism.
Well, that's right. That's right. It's the means to the ends, right? He thinks the ends are great, but, and any means are useful to get you there.
Yeah. Well, we'll explore Flag Smasher a little bit more when we in our next episode when we revisit those Cap comics. So, all
Yeah.
right, number 7. That was good. All right, so number 6 on our list is an interesting character. I definitely believe that this person belongs here. I'm going to let one of our Facebook members go ahead and state his case on why he feels this person belongs on the top 10 list.
My vote for the greatest Captain America villain, not named Red Skull, is Viper, also known as Madam Hydra. She first appeared in Captain America 110, February 1969, by Stan Lee and Jim Steranko, 52 years ago, and she still looks great for her age. She's been Cap's adversary numerous times in storylines by great Cap writers like Englehart and DeMatteis. But my favorite, and the one I started collecting Cap reading, was Captain America 341 to 344 by Grunwald and Dwyer. In this, she led a coup and replaced Sidewinder as the new leader of the Serpent Society. She led an attack on Washington, D.C. to poison the water supply. This included President Ronald Reagan, who ended up fighting Cap as she escaped.
Well, that was from James Foley, again from our Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group. So thank you, James, for calling in. And we agree with you that Viper, Madam Hydra, definitely belongs on our top 10 list. And Bob, she's coming at number 6.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I love Viper, and for a lot of reasons, but not least that. And have you seen, the way Jim Steranko drew her in Captain America 111? And I encourage everyone to turn to page 5 of that issue, because that is one of the best splash pages I think I've ever seen. And it features Madam Hydra, Viper, who later becomes Viper, in all her glory. I mean, I'm talking serious va-va-voom. I'm a big fan of the Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, but Viper really gives her a run for her money on that page.
Bob, come on. So that goes by. Like last episode, did you take a look at that Bernie Rosenthal?
I'm still a teenage boy at heart, Rick. I can't help it, man.
I hear you, man. I hear you.
Yeah, but seriously, her first appearances there in the Captain America Steranko run, issues 110, 111, and 13, in which Cap and Rick Jones, as filling in for Bucky, stumble upon Viper, at this point Madam Hydra, and Hydra's New York branch's attempt to poison the city water supply was just a great story arc, right? And she was just so deliciously evil and dark in many ways. And so, and as James commented on a number of different appearances over the years, but I almost hesitate to say this because you just made fun of me. But one of my favorite appearances was in issue 394 back in December 1991, when the Viper returns and joins Red Skull in a hot tub, right? And man, I just there were teenage boys like all over this country, including I wasn't a teenager at that time. I was a little older than a teenager, but man, oh man, that was like, wow, she's back and looking pretty damn good. So she's been back time and time again, and there was a great crossover in '93 in issue 15 of Silver Sable and the Wild Pack that crossed over with Captain America 419 to 420. Where Red Skull actually turns his back on her. At that point, she's got his financial backing, and she's coming up with a great plan to turn everybody, or at least a lot of people in the world, blind through this television broadcast that's going to blind them. But even he, at that point, has had enough of her, and she's too nihilist for even his tastes. And so, that's pretty evil when you've got a plan that even Red Skull can't get behind because it goes too far. So, I think why is she deserve to be on this list? Well, she is an unrepentant evil person. I mean, she is an unrepentant villain in every way, and she doesn't want to make money, and she's not into fame, and she's really not into power per se. She is a nihilist, right? She wants to break down society and return humanity to its original savage state, because she thinks that's the way it should be. I mean, she is crazy. in every way, and I love it for it.
I agree 100%. She's totally crazy. I mean, I remember during a when she was in the pages of the DeMatteis Zek run, and I think it was then, and she killed one of her own member, like one of her own team,
Yeah,
like threw the person down to a pit, and just the look on her face, of just like how much evil joy she was getting out of seeing this member of her own team be slaughtered. It was scary. She totally is crazy. She's a wacko.
yeah, she is wacko.
Yeah.
I think it was an issue. Maybe it was issue 420 when she's in the broadcasting TV station and Cap finally gets his hands on her, and there's this great panel where she is lunging forward. It's just their heads, and she's lunging forward trying to bite him, and her fangs are extended, and he's kind of like got his head kind of retracted back, avoiding her. I just love that. I love that panel because she is she's crazy.
Yeah. All right, that was number 6 on our list. So I'm going to kind of go back here and take a look at this. And so we have number 10 was Batroc. Number 9, the Grand Director. Number 8, Sin. Number 7, Flag Smasher. And number 6, Viper, Madam Hydra. Okay, so now we're here in our top 5 of Captain America villains not named Red Skull. And so I have here at number 5, this one here, I believe, totally belongs. It's underrated. One of probably the most underrated. If we did a top 10 underrated Captain America villains, I would say this one would be number 1. And in my mind, this is Johann Fenoff, but you may more affectionately know him as Dr. Faustus. So Dr. Faustus had first appeared back in November of 1968 with Captain America 107. So talk about staying power, right? This villain was originally introduced back then, and it was an actually interesting story because Cap was having these nightmares about the war. And so he decided to call this newly hired psychiatrist, Dr. Faustus, and Dr. Faustus at that point said, "You know what? I'm going to try to turn Captain America insane." And it was that's where he kind of got his start, the two of them together. But he has been along the path, and all of some of Cap's greatest defeats and worst moments, he was there, right? So he in issue Cap 161 to 162, he treated an amnesiac Peggy Carter, and captured also her niece Sharon Carter, and Sharon's parents in an attempt to destroy Captain America. And it was a really interesting story. He comes back later in the issues 232 through 236. He, as you mentioned, was the creator of the neo-Nazi group National Force, and he brainwashed Cap from the 50s, William Burnside, and turned him into the Grand Director to lead the group. He also brainwashed Agent Carter, Sharon Carter, convincing her to commit suicide, but luckily she survived. He also temporarily brainwashed Cap, but he was able to break free thanks to his help from Daredevil. So later on, Dr. Faustus comes back, issue 326. He's allied with the Red Skull, and he's occupying the mansion known as the Skull House. And in there, Faustus attempts to coerce Cap into committing suicide through a use of holograms appearing as ghosts. In volume 5, he's working as a SHIELD psychiatrist, and which also an employee of Red Skull, and he manipulates Agent Carter, basically increasing Sharon's romantic attachment to Captain America. And then he manipulates Sharon into assassinating Captain America in Captain America number 25, right? Uh, Later on in Volume 5, the Grand Director was revealed to be alive, and but he was in Dr. Faust's care and recuperating, and reconditioned him, sent him to battle the Cap, Bucky Barnes Cap, and after the failure, and he was getting a lot of abuse from Red Skull and Zola, so he kind of withdrew from the project and freed Agent Carter, but he came back during the trial of Captain America, and he actually, to get a presidential pardon, he goes in on to do testimony in the trial, but he uses his skills to manipulate the prosecutor into attacking the judge. Right. Then later, during Secret Empire, Faustus joined Hydra's High Council and helped transform Hydra, and helped them take control of the organization and killing Red Skull. Right. And then Faustus later provided his hypnotic skills during a recording of his voice to mind control Shield's many agents to make it easier for Rogers to take over and facilitate, his plan to take over the United States. So he has been behind so many horrible things that have happened to Cap, including his assassination, and he gets no credit. I would say I could probably count on one hand how many covers of Captain America Dr. Faustus has been on. Right? I mean, he was on 161, 192, and 236, and then a couple of others in the background of a montage of various Cap villains, like in 600 and Volume 5, number 19. But he gets no love. And so I know to some people, it's like, who? When I mentioned Dr. Faustus, but I know for our listeners and many members of the Captain America Facebook group, they're like, oh, of course, he definitely deserves to be here, and I could see why he would be number 5.
Yeah, and this is a guy who deserves to be a villain just for the bad name that he's given the science of psychiatry as a medical profession, right? I mean, this guy has broken the Hippocratic Oath I don't know how many times. But another thing about Faustus is he's not just a big brain. I mean, in the few occasions that I remember that he's engaged in fisticuffs, he's acquitted himself fairly well. So he's a tough guy as well, not just a smart guy.
True. He he has normal human strength, but he is a big man.
He's a big man.
Yeah. Okay, so number 4 on this list. Bob, do you want to say who's made it to number 4?
Yeah, this is a great villain, right? But he confuses a lot of folks, I think, and for good reasons, right? Because he has popped up so many times in so many places that it's confusing to know whether he's alive or dead or what the hell is going on. But number 4 on our list, Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, and I love the Baron. Strucker is an interesting character, and I think. Other than the Red Skull, who we're not talking about today, Strucker, at least historically speaking, I think is the oldest villain on our list in terms of this guy's been around a long, long time, right?
Yeah.
Because his first appearance was in Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos number 5 way back in January 1964. So this guy made his appearance a long, long time ago. So I think for sure that makes him at least the historically the oldest Cap villain on our list, if not certainly not chronologically, because some of the other villains have been retconned as being somewhat more distant in the past. So this guy's been he's been around a long time, and he's been a perennial, as we've said, a thorn in the side, not just of Captain America, but Nick Fury. And so his other than his Howling Commandos appearances, his next big appearance was in Strange Tales 156 to 158 way back in 1967, where the infamous Satan's Claw was first introduced. And it was in that run that his organic body was destroyed for the first time. And so every other time that we've seen him popped up, it's really been his, and this is where it gets a little confusing time, whether it's his consciousness or that has been transferred into LMDs, life model decoys, in many of the other stories, or if it's something else going on, a copy of his consciousness as opposed to his actual consciousness. But he's been in so many titles in so many different places, you know, and we've talked about the Machine Smith arc in a previous podcast where Machine Smith had ginned up basically a copy of Strucker as a decoy to lure Captain America. And that
John Byrne podcast that we did. Yeah, that was a lot of fun talking about him there.
Yeah, I mean that was fun. And he was in the story arc from 273 to 274. That was his first actual appearance after his demise in Strange Tales 158. And that was penciled by Zeck and written by David Kraft, inked by John Beatty, and of course colored by Bob Sharon, who we've talked to in a previous podcast. And that's a great storyline, right? Because that starts off with Cap joining a reunion of the surviving Howler Commandos along with Nick Fury, only to have the Commandos' former CO, General Sawyer, kidnapped by Hydra. And it turns out that Baron Strucker, in some form anyway, an LMD, is the Hydra Supreme. And they're trying to steal a B-52 and use that as a weapon. So, I mean, that's a great storyline. And I think a lot of people maybe don't realize this, but there's a great cover to issue 274 that show Cap and Strucker going to blows. And if you look carefully at that, it has that same feel as that famous Captain America 350 issue that I know that you love. And it's the same pose, you know, with going blow to blow on the cover. And I mean, that's a great. But you know, Strucker's he's played a role in a lot of great stories, and one of my favorite ones is, and a lot of people maybe haven't read this one, but it's a 5-issue miniseries from 2011 called Captain America: Hail Hydra, that sort of covers this story way back in World War II up through the modern times that show Hydra scientists, led in part by Baron Strucker, trying to use resurrected Nazi soldiers, you know. They call them ombies, not zombies, but ombies in this miniseries, and use these resurrected Nazi soldiers as a force to take over the world. So it's a great storyline, and Strucker plays an important role in that. But you know, Strucker, as I said, he's popped up so many times, and he has such a historical legacy in the Marvel world that I think he absolutely deserves to be in our top 10 list, and certainly in the top 5.
Yes, I agree with you, and I know a lot of our Facebook members also agree. Who they've put their votes in as well. So moving along, we've got the top three Captain American villains not named Red Skull. So for our next one, number 3, we have Doug Hogan, one of our Facebook group members, called in and stated his case. So here we go.
Okay, my choice for top 10 Captain America villains not named the Red Skull is Crossbones, a.k.a. Brock Rumlow. It's created by Mark Grunwald, first appeared in Captain America Volume 1, number 359. This guy's proficient in hand-to-hand combat, weapons training. He's a military strategist, former NYC gang leader. He was trained by Taskmaster. He even rose to the rank of instructor in Taskmaster School. He's worked with Hydra, Red Skull. He was trained by the Red Skull in the art of combat. He went from being a bit of a motor mouth to a silent, menacing killer under Jeff Loeb and Rob Liefeld in Captain America Volume 2, number 3. And he went back to his old ways. He dropped the silent and menacing just in time for the Civil War storyline. He played a critical part in the now iconic death of Captain America in Captain America Volume 5, number 25. He's got a great look, and I think he's one of the top 10 villains of Captain America.
All right, there we have it. Number 3 is Crossbones. So I totally agree. I totally agree that he needs to be up there. And and as Doug pointed out, he did make his first appearance at Captain America 359, although it was more of a cameo, if you will. He was just in the shadows. 360 really is known as his first appearance, and then he he actually, I think he was named finally in 362. So yeah, he's a great character for many reasons. He did mention, Doug mentioned that his fighting prowess, right, and he was trained by Taskmaster, and he does have he does actually he is augmented somehow with his strength and his durability and his reflexes. So he's above and beyond just a normal human. And he, in fact, I think was it during Streets of Poison where Daredevil came across Cap and Crossbones, and Daredevil, using, I guess, his radar sense, said that the Crossbones' physical condition very much resembles Captain America's. So they have that ability to be toe to toe as far as in fighting. So as far as his strength, his durability, his speed, his stamina, his reflexes, all of that. He's also a master martial artist. So he's as I mentioned before, trained extensively with Taskmaster, to the point where, as Doug pointed out, he was actually made an instructor in Taskmaster's school for criminals, and he's an excellent marksman. So with whether that's his trademark crossbow, throwing knives, guns, whatever it is, but his background's a little convoluted, a little interesting, because it ties very closely with Diamondback, which was she was her alias name is Diamondback, but she's Rachel Layton. We covered in one of our episodes the Bloodstone hunt, right? And but what happened at the end of the Bloodstone hunt was that Diamondback was missing, right? So we didn't touch on what happened after that, but basically Crossbones kidnapped Diamondback and used her as a bait to trap Captain America in Madripoor. So they had a history, and what it goes back to is, so when Rachel was, I think, probably like 15, she had a brother, Danny. He was known as Cutthroat, and they had another brother named Ricky, and Danny and Ricky fell into this gang led by this man known as Bing. Well, Bing, turns out, was his nickname, and that was Brock Rumlow. And so Rachel, yearning to be included, she approached Bing alone and claiming she would do anything to join the gang. And so Brock, or Bing at the time, beat up Rachel and apparently raped her. So he's not a good guy, right?
Not a good guy.
Yeah. And then her two brothers came to her rescue and assaulted Brock, and he apparently killed them. So that's when he fled to go to Taskmaster's school and been there for a while. He then went and led the Skeleton Crew when he went to work for the Red Skull. And that happened for a little while, and there were some good stories about that. And then he had a falling out with the Skull. He eventually kidnapped Rachel again, brainwashed and tortured her, abusing her repeatedly and forcing her through a rigid combat training routine so Crossbones forced Diamondback to steal Captain America's blood from the Avengers Mansion, which had the super soldier serum in it. So they wanted to get that. So he returned to the employ of Red Skull and the Skeleton Crew. He actually, the Skeleton Crew had a new leader while he was gone. It was Cutthroat, Diamondback's brother Daniel. And he was plotting Crossbones' murder, and Crossbones just slit Cutthroat's jugular. Again, not a nice guy.
Not a nice guy.
Diamondback escaped and went to Cap and the Falcon, and Crossbones was imprisoned. So, but he later, as we mentioned before, was broken out, and he was part of the whole assassination of Caps, right? He was the sniper, while Sharon was the one who was brainwashed by Faustus to shoot him. In the background was Crossbones as the sniper. And so yeah, he's been around. He was then recruited to be part of the Thunderbolts, led by Luke Cage. He then helped Sin, as I mentioned before, looking for that hammer of the worthy. So they were kind of globetrotting around. He was later an inmate of Pleasant Hill, which was part of that whole Kobik Cosmic Cube storyline, right? And so and then eventually he became, where he and Sin were part of the charge of the super prison. That was part of the Secret Empire story where Hydra was in charge. So they were part of that. So he's been around, and he's been a true thorn in Cap's side as far as being not only someone who could fight him hand to hand, but part of a lot of the bad parts of what happened to Cap in some of his lowest stories throughout his career.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I can't dispute Crossbones being in the top 5 of this list. That guy has just not a nice guy, Rick. Just not a nice guy. That's putting it mildly, you know?
Yes, I agree. He's completely a villain, an evil to the core of his body, and
yeah,
somebody we love reading about.
yeah. I never tire of Crossbones.
All right, so number 2 on our list of top 10 Captain America villains not named the Red Skull, we have Daniel Tenney called in. And actually, I want to shout out to Daniel. He's also another one of our moderators and does a great job in the Facebook group. So thank you for that, Daniel. And he states his reason for...
Hey guys, thanks for the awesome podcast. I just wanted to weigh in on the top 10 Cap villains not named the Red Skull. My vote would be for Armin Zola. Not only has Armin Zola been a great villain for many years, but he's also created other Cap villains like the Hate Monger amongst others, and he's kept the Red Skull going by providing him with clone bodies that he's used. So the number 1 Cap villain wouldn't be around if it wasn't for Armin Zola. Armin Zola, I think, also represents the antithesis of what Cap represents. Whereas Cap uses his power to help others and be selfless and to promote personal liberties, the Armin Zola uses his science for personal gain and greed. So I hope to hear from you guys on what you think about this great Cap villain.
Yeah, I agree. He definitely belongs on the top 10 list, and I can see why he'd be number 2.
Yeah, you know, the thing about Zola is he seems like he's been around an awful long time. And but his first appearance was in Captain America 208 back in April 1977, straight out of the mind of Jack Kirby. And you know, that always surprises me because you know, he subsequently, you know, we've read about Zola's exploits during World War II, and you know, he's been his story has been fleshed out in so many ways, but in fact, yeah, he's not as ancient as, you know, we would expect him to be in terms of his importance in the Cap mythos, and he's just a fascinating character, right? He's a PhD, you know, he calls himself a biogeneticist. He's really a biofanatic, you know, that's how he's been described. But he's got a PhD in genetics, but he's also a medical doctor, an evil one, mind you, but a medical doctor as well. And he's a crazy, like a fox mad scientist, but he's equally adept at many different kinds of sciences. So, you know, following his early years of experimentation, apparently he got his knowledge, as we've learned subsequently, through an old manuscript that had knowledge developed by the deviants back in the ancient days. And this is how he got his expertise. But, you know, he started off making little monsters back in World War II and caught the attention of Hitler and Red Skull and Baron Strucker. And it was under their sort of sponsorship that his evil genius eventually bloomed into what we have witnessed in subsequent storylines. And you know, we've learned that back in you know, in Captain America 209, he recounted his origin story and how he had been frail and weak. And he eventually created his own body to replace his organic body, and that's where you know, we see his brain embedded in his chest with that sort of visage of his face transmitted on his chest, because it's safer. It's a more a well-designed body. More indestructible body for Zola, as well as his ESP box that can rise in and out of his torso. So I mean, it's just a fantastic image. And every time I see Zola portrayed in in these comics, I think, man, this guy is a wacky guy that would give up his organic body voluntarily because he knows it will promote his ability to carry out his devious schemes much more efficiently and effectively. So, I mean, he's been in so many times and in so many Cap adventures, as Daniel has mentioned, and he's been so instrumental. He's been in so many storylines, and in fact, there's been. I'm sure you're a fan of Volume 7, right? The Remender Romita Jr. run, in Dimension Z, right? I mean, that whole volume essentially revolves around Zola. So, I mean, Zola has popped up almost as many times as Red Skull in Captain America's many adventures, always adding a bit of evil genius, scientist flair to the schemes and plans of the Skull. And one of the things I really like about the sort of the Zola and the Red Skull relationship is that they often bicker like an old married couple. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, I love that because Red Skull tolerates Zola because of what Zola brings to the partnership, and Zola tolerates the Red Skull sort of grudgingly because the Red Skull sponsors Zola's work and gives him the freedom to pull off some of the crazy stuff that he wants to pull off.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a prominent role, as you know, as Daniel mentioned, in the Brubaker Epting Captain America run, volume 5, as well as in volume 6, and in the Remender Romita Jr. Volume 7 in Dimension Z. I mean, that was Zola was such a central part of that run.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I know that the Dimension Z, there's some people out there who love that story, some people not so much. I really respect what Remender was doing for that story because for many levels, one, he recognized Zola's importance as a Captain America villain and wanted to give him prominence instead of being this secondary character to Red Skull, as you kind of mentioned, right? He's normally been that secondary character where, this, brought him to where he belongs, quite frankly, as a number one villain. And then, of course, the other thing I thought was great about that story, and we'll talk about this maybe another podcast down the line, is I thought that was a great way to bring that whole Cap man out of time story back with a twist. And so that was really cool. But yeah, I agree. I think Zola definitely belongs on this list, and I can see why he would be here at number 2.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things back in the 2016 Secret Empire run and all the crossovers, he sat at the table as a member of the Hydra Supreme Council, serving none other than Hydra Supreme himself, Steve Rogers, which is a crazy twist if you think about it. So, I mean, yeah, he definitely deserves to be way up here on the list, and how could he not be, right? I mean, some of the crazy shenanigans that he's been in, but he's also had, as Daniel mentioned, had a hand in some interesting creatures and other villains that he's helped create along the way, right? I mean, he preserved Hitler's brain and cloned him first as Nazi X and then as the hate monger. He was there to help launch Hydra. He's the guy that gave Baron Strucker the ability to transfer his consciousness from one LMD to another. And as Daniel mentioned, he's cloned Captain America's body for the Red Skull's consciousness to occupy. I've lost count of how many times he's moved Red Skull's mind around. I'm surprised he hasn't misplaced it at this point.
Yeah.
And like, how many times has Zola helped recreate the Cosmic Cube, right?
Right.
I mean, this guy, yeah. I mean, this guy's a super genius, but in an evil way. Yeah. And let's not forget, right? He gave us Doughboy, which is one of my favorites.
You just gave away the number 1 villain on the list.
Yeah.
Yes. And number 1, top 10.
Doughboy.
Red Skull.
I'll tell you, that guy, I love Doughboy. I don't know about anybody else, but
the House of Dough. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now let's get to number 1, right? And if for all you keeping track at home, right? We had number 10, Batroc, number 9, Grand Director, number 8, Sin, number 7, Flag Smasher, Number 6, Viper, Madam Hydra. Number 5, Dr. Faustus. Number 4, Baron von Strucker. Number 3, Crossbones. Number 2, Arnim Zola. And the number 1 villain for Captain America, not named Red Skull, we have our good friend John Waller Sewell, who's going to come back and state his case.
Hey guys, this is John Waller Sewell. I want to tell you guys what a great job I think you're doing with this podcast. I'm enjoying it tremendously. And as soon as I saw that you guys were wanting to do a top 10 Cap villains, I got to give a shout out to one of my favorite Marvel villains, and especially Captain America villains of all time. That's Baron Zemo 2, Helmet Zemo. I had the LP and comic combo for his first appearance, where he came back as the Phoenix before he became Baron Zemo fully. And I've just loved that character ever since, and especially everything he's done in making Steve Rogers' life the living hell that he can always overcome. So thank you guys. Looking forward to the episode.
All right, there we have it. Number 1, Baron Zemo. Is there any doubt that he was going to be this high on the list?
No, absolutely not. I mean, Zemo is crazy like a fox too, and just integral to the Cap mythos.
Right. I mean, as John pointed out, he was introduced early on as the Phoenix, and that was in Captain America 168. And so Helmet Zemo, also known as the 13th Baron Zemo, also known in Marvel Comics as Zemo 2, following the death of his father, he took up the title, and he blamed Captain America, and he adapted the guise of the Phoenix in order to get revenge and kill Cap. Zemo was defeated, of course, and he fell into a vat of adhesive X, horribly disfiguring him, which was something that his father also was, part of that whole adhesive X thing. He was gone. He was gone for a while. But J.M. DeMatteis brought him back in the classic story of Cap 275, 276. And now Zemo, working with Arnim Zola and his monstrous creations, he allied with Primus, and he kidnapped Steve Rogers' childhood friend, Arnie Roth, in order to lure Cap into a trap. And so that was a great story. Later on in 293 to 297, Zemo encountered Cynthia Schmidt, who at that time was known as Mother Superior, and working with the Red Skull. He went under training by Sin and the Red Skull, and again kidnapped Arnie Roth, and also kidnapped Captain America's Steve Rogers' friend, David Cox, brainwashed him. An interesting thing about David Cox was he was a pacifist, and he brainwashed him to fight Captain America. So that was, just a horrible, twisted mind of Zemo there. But he may go down as becoming a real hated villain in the pages of the Avengers. So there is this story in Avengers 273 to 278 where Zemo tried to take over the world and take revenge on Captain America. But this particular scheme, he wanted to recreate his father's team of supervillains known as the Masters of Evil. And he basically, with the Masters of Evil, succeeded in taking over the Avengers Mansion and taking over, against the Avengers. And it was basically giving them one of their most serious defeats. And there was this one scene where Zemo is gloating over a captured Cap, who is forced to watch as Mr. Hyde just beats up Edwin Jarvis, leaving him hospitalized for weeks and a blind in one eye for months, and also destroying Cap's footlocker, which contained all of his most sacred personal possessions. But Cap, of course, ultimately overpowers Zemo and wins the day. And as a side note, later on, a repentant Baron Zemo uses the power of the twin moonstones to travel back in time and reclaim the Footlocker before its destruction, returned it to Cap. This was in Thunderbolts, but he's been around for a while. And one of the stories in Cap 431 to 434, he married this Baroness and a woman who once claimed to be a reincarnation of Henrik Zemo. And the two lived in this castle Zemo, and they took in these 25 children who they deemed worthy and adopted them into the home. And these were basically abducted children, and raised them, brainwashed them. I mean, these are screwed up people, right? Diamondback eventually helped Cap, beat them and free the children. Yeah, I mean, there's just story after story after story of Zemo coming back. He, gosh, I want to say in issue 609, he worked with the Red Skull's exiles, this guy by the name of Jurgen Hauptmann, and this new female Beetle and the Fixer, and basically exposed that Bucky Barnes was the Winter Soldier. And so created that living hell for Bucky and what happened from there. And then I mentioned before, he worked with Sin during Fear Itself. In Volume 6, he teams up with Codename Bravo to kill Cap, and allies with the Hydra Queen to found a new Hydra. He battles. He's got a major story with he battles Sam Wilson when he was Captain America, and then also. As I mentioned before, he was very important to the Hydra Captain America storyline. So he has been around for quite a long time, quite a history with Cap, and he absolutely deserves to be number one on this top 10 list. That is not Red Skull.
Yeah. No, you're right. In fact, that he was, I think, I hesitate to use this phrase, but I think he was like best friends with Hydra Cap, and they seemed very close.
Yeah.
So, which is not a good sign.
No, they were kindred spirits.
Yeah. So.
All right. So that's the top 10 list. So let's talk about those who maybe made it as an honorable mention. So, Bob, as promised, we're going to talk about some of these characters, these villains that are honorable mention. These are characters that, there's an argument for them to make it into the top 10. But for whatever reason, they didn't for us.
Yeah. And I think we got to be upfront here, man. I think, we've been sort of referring to these guys as honorable mentions, but there's nothing honorable about them, right? We got to call them dishonorable mentions.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. So, first up on first contribution here, I think that I want to throw out there is William Lomer, the lurid Nietzschean nightmare. I mean, we're talking the original Nazi Übermensch or Overman, the Masterman himself.
Yeah.
I got a thing for Masterman. Not as much. I know you're going to laugh at this. Not as much for Warrior Woman, but but Masterman for sure.
You got it.
That's right. So, Masterman had his first appearance in Giant Size Invaders back in March 1975, created by Roy Thomas and Frank Robbins, and that issue was inked by Vince Colletta. But I love the guy, and he's popped up every now and again. And, the thing I find fascinating about Masterman is, his origins were, they're not too far off from Steve Rogers' Cap himself, right? I mean, Lomer was a sickly 98-pound weakling too. But, the difference was he was sent over here by Hitler to help found these Nazi Bund organizations in America. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of interesting thing about Masterman was that, he wasn't, you'd assume he was created in the laboratories over in Berlin, but he wasn't. He was created in a laboratory here in the United States by the Brain Drain, who stole some of the super soldier formula notes and tried to recreate it with Lomer. And so, you know, he in that first issue, that giant size invaders, they create him and they send him out to take out a U.S. battleship in the Chesapeake Bay Harbor. And of course, the invaders show up at the very last minute to stop him, just in the nick of time. So, you know, he may have been defeated by the invaders in his initial outing back in Giant Size Invaders, but he popped up again in Invaders 20 and 21, where he and his, and I dare say it, his hot, though not entirely loving wife, warrior woman, Julia Koenig, you know, fought the invaders again. Mm-hmm. So he's gone up against the Liberty Legion and the Thing and Marvel 2-in-1 Annual 1 and Marvel 2-in-1 number 20. And he had a pretty critical role in that 4-issue miniseries, Black Panther, Captain America, Flags of Our Fathers, which is a sort of a flashback adventure of Cap back in World War II, heading into Wakanda with Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos to stop the Red Skull, Von Strucker, and Master Man from plundering Wakanda's vibranium reserves. So that was a great story as well. Mm. And yeah, you know, there's another story out there. It's really it's unclear if it's part of Master Man mythos, because he dies in this particular story, but that's not the only time he's died in the Marvel in Marvel stories. But Marvel Comics Presents 123 tells a really interesting story about the end of Master Man's life and his self-loathing and regret at what he did for the Nazis. So he's an interesting guy, and I think, you know, those Invaders tales and the Marvel 2-in-1 tales, I think, are some great villain stories. So for that reason, and for his wife, we've got to get him on the dishonorable mention list.
Okay. Well, you know what? You certainly know a heck of a lot more about Master Man than I do. So I'll have to take your word for that. And maybe I'll check out some of those stories that you mentioned, because, you know, it's always fun kind of reading about some nasty villains of Captain America and learning some new ones. So I admit, don't know much about him. So I'll bow to you on this one.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, so another one that should be on these dishonorable mention list, and this one is actually a Stan Lee and Jack Kirby creation, going all the way back to 1967 in Tales of Suspense 93. And for those who know their Silver Age Marvel comics, you know I'm talking about MODOK. Now, MODOK is an acronym, as we had talked before about those acronyms back then, right? And this one was the mental organism designed only for computing, and that's with the C at the end, but eventually became MODOK with a K, which was a mental organism designed only for killing. So if you don't, I mean, how do you not know this character? You know, they've made fun of this character for so long because he's goofy looking, right? He's just this big giant head with these little arms, and
like a big baby.
Yeah, and he's ugly, and I mean, you know, the story behind this character is that it was this guy by the name of George Tarleton. And he worked for AIM, which is another acronym for Advanced Idea Mechanics. And he joined the team to work on the Cosmic Cube. And but he was mutated into a human computer by the Scientist Supreme. And they gave him this brain to give him superhuman intellect but it ended up being this massive cranium, right? It was just too much for his frail body. So he was placed in this life support unit dubbed the Doomsday Chair, and it gave him a lot of psychic powers, and you know, he went on to use these new found powers to take control of AIM that had experimented on him. So you know, as far as the longevities you know, criteria, he certainly meets that by a long shot, but I don't know, he's just too goofy. I mean, he gets made fun of too much to really be taken seriously. So, and I'm not even going to the female counterpart of Modam. But yeah, so that's why didn't make the top 10 list, but hey, it's a Stan Lee, Jack Kirby creation that, very memorable character.
Yeah, yeah. I got to tell you, I've never been a really big fan of MODOK. I've kind of often just wanted to skip over those issues. But I picked up they've got a new title that just came out recently, MODOK Head Games, and or a Head Trip, I guess, or something like that. What is it? I don't know. But I picked up the first issue because it's written in part by Patton Oswalt, the actor and comedian. Yeah, and it's a hilarious title now, and it's really kind of fun to just read for the fun of it.
Yeah, and maybe I'll check it out because I love Patton Oswalt. I think he's hilarious. But there you go, he's not being taken very seriously. So
yeah, well, true.
Seriously for the top 10 list.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, man, I think I'm going to throw one out there that another one of those crazy guys that seems to keep popping up every now and again. And you know him as Adolf Hitler, but we know him as the Hate Monger. Yeah, I love the Hate Monger, man. Just that costume with the purple hood and the hate ray gun. I mean, how can you not love that guy, right? So first appearance back in Fantastic Four 21. Right, that's back in December 1963. So I mean, that was a long time ago. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. All right, so it's a long, sad story, but Arnim Zola, of course, once again involved in essentially energizing Hitler's brain shortly before he died at the hands of the invaders, Human Torch and Toro, the original Human Torch, and allowing Hitler to be able to psionically transfer his mind into a cloned brain. And over the years, Zola has helped him create a number of different bodies. And so that first appearance in Fantastic Four 21 as the Hate Monger, down in San Gusto, a country in South America, where he tried to create a revolution using his hate ray gun. And Fantastic Four, with Nick Fury helping them out, managed to put a stop to that. But in the process of doing that, Hate Monger accidentally fired his hate ray gun at two of the guys that worked for him, and they turned around and shot him dead. But, and you think...
Every time you say hate ray gun...
and you think that would be the end of it, but no, because he can psionically transfer his conscious, he continued to do that a number of times, about 6 times from my count. But of course, he showed up for the first time in Captain America 208 to 212. That was Arnim Zola's first appearance in the Marvel comics, and in that story he was Nazi X. Remember that guy with the brain and a robot body? And Zola was going to transfer that consciousness into Cap's body, but fortunately Cap wiggled out of that one at the last minute. And he showed up again. Old Hate Monger has showed up again in Nick Fury in a couple of the tales, 9, 10, and 11.
Wait,
and he popped.
Hold on. Did he have his hate ray gun?
He had the hate ray gun, and he even popped up, of all titles, in Creatures on the Loose, number 35, back in May 1975. So, just a great guy. But a great guy, yeah.
Guy, Adolf Hitler. He's like, just misunderstood.
He really is. He really is. He's got ambition. But I think the best story was, and I love this title, the supervillain team up series from the late 1970s. I mean, just a great title, right?
Yeah.
And then the issues 16 and 17, Red Skull and the Hate Monger were trying to reconstitute, with, of course, Zola's help, the Cosmic Cube. And the Hate Monger transferred his consciousness into the Cosmic Cube, thinking this was going to give him ultimate power and make him the primo villain. And Red Skull outfoxed him and got him trapped inside that somewhat imperfect Cosmic Cube. And then, to the Hate Monger's, I'm sure, utter disappointment, Red Skull just kept that Cosmic Cube around as sort of a little knickknack on his shelf with Adolf Hitler. I mean, I love that. Good old Red Skull. He became primo villain after pulling that fast one on Adolf Hitler. So, he's continued to be around again and again. And Hate Monger popped up again in Captain America Volume 3, 26 and 27, where he went so far as to desecrate Cap's shield by painting a swastika on it. So, I mean, come on. That's just a kick in the pants right there. So I don't know. I think this guy, he definitely deserves a dishonorable mention. he's been around a long time. He's got some staying power. And of course, when you can transfer your consciousness, why wouldn't you stay around for a while? So definitely one of my picks.
Ah, okay. Where do I start? Okay, I'm just going to start by saying Adolf Hitler, right? I mean, I get that it was the 60s. I get that it was, 20 some years after World War II, and it was an easy pick to if you're going to come up with the worst villain of all time, the scariest villain of all time, you're going to go with Adolf Hitler because he was real. He was absolutely. But, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to have to say, yeah, definitely not a top 10.
Not a top 10, but definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah. It had its place in the history of the Marvel universe, just like a lot of things that were, we look at now and say, oh, it's very dated. But it had its place. I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Not everyone's timeless like Doughboy.
All right. So next, we actually had someone call in for this one, and so this is a one of our Facebook members, Seth Talley, and he called in because there was somebody he thought should make the top 10 list.
Hi, Rick and Bob. This is Seth, and for my nomination for the top 10 Cap villains not named Red Skull, it's got to be number 1 from the Secret Empire from Steve Englehart's run. I mean, you find out that the head of the Secret Empire is literally the President of the United States. It shatters Cap for a little bit, literally making him create Nomad as a persona so he could still help people along the way because he was so shook at the time. I do not know how you can even fathom having a list of Cap's top villains without talking about number 1 from the Secret Empire.
Ooh, yeah.
Well, and a shout out to Seth Talley. By the way, if you want to check him out, he actually did a comic book called Dalrak the Mighty, and it's Dalrak the Mighty. It's a self-published, smaller, independent book, but it's pretty cool. So, yeah, sorry, Seth. Number 1 is not in the top 10. Technically speaking.
It's a paradox, but that's
10. So yeah, I totally get that he did something really impactful that a lot of villains, even villains in our top 10, maybe didn't even do, where he beat Captain America in such a way that he was so disillusioned by the betrayal of America's commander-in-chief that he abandoned being Captain America for a time and became Nomad. That is something you definitely have to tip your hat at and say, yeah, wow, he did achieve that. I think where I guess he doesn't make it into top 10 for me is, that criteria of longevity, right? I mean, he was introduced back in 1972, and this was Steve Englehart's creation back when he was writing Amazing Adventures, Volume 2. And he created him as this hooded man who was trying to overthrow the government by capturing mutants and taking their mutant power and channeling it to this weapon, which, basically all the mutants were hunted, during that time. So it was a very cool story, and then made it over into, the Secret Empire in the pages of Captain America, because again, Steve Englehart was writing that as well. And, his death was in mid 1974. So he didn't even last 2 years. While it was never said that it was Richard Nixon, Steve Englehart had said later in interviews that, yeah, it was basically Richard Nixon. So, yeah, he deserves to be mentioned totally in the dishonorable mention because of what he did that really just discouraged Steve Rogers.
Yeah. I agree with that. We got to just definitely throw a bone out there to number 1. But yeah, he doesn't rate in the top 10, but definitely deserves a dishonorable mention.
Yep.
Yeah. So I got one for you, Rick, and this is gonna. I think this is gonna. This is gonna blow a lot of minds, but because I know this is a controversial one, and I'm talking Steve Rogers, but I'm not talking our Steve Rogers. I'm talking Hydra Supreme Steve Rogers.
Ah,
That guy deserves a dishonorable mention. So, yeah, his first appearance was in the Captain America Sam Wilson series, #7, written by Nick Spencer. And, that's where he kind of pops up. But not until Captain America Steve Rogers #1, and, these were back in 2016, did he introduce himself with those unforgivable words, "Hail Hydra."
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the utterance heard round the world, right? I mean, that caused a lot of gnashing of teeth.
It did. It
Among,
totally rocked the comic world and made actually it made the news.
yeah, a lot of different places covered that announcement. So he's the central antagonist in the story that Cap lovers either love or hate. I mean, it's a complicated switcheroo where the sentient cosmic cube Kobik swaps out the prime Steve Rogers with one from an alternate timeline that has been rewritten to conform to Red Skull's vision for how the world should have unfolded after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that entire sordid tale takes place in the 10-issue Secret Empire miniseries and several crossover arcs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the first time we see him in dress uniform as Hydra Supreme is in Captain America Steve Rogers #17, but his battle uniform in Secret Empire #9, and that uniform is infused with the power of the cosmic cube is really an unforgettable splash page. That one really takes the cake. But in #10, Secret Empire #10, that's where that tale ultimately concludes with that battle between our Captain America Steve Rogers and Hydra Supreme to determine who, in fact, is worthy. And we know how that one turned out. So now this Hydra Supreme Cap eventually met his end, or did he, at the hands of Selene in the current run of Captain America #8. So I don't know if we'll be seeing him again. Last time I saw him, he was being melted. And with blood coming out every orifice and pore. So I don't know if we're going to see him again anytime soon, but you never know. Anything's possible in the Marvel universe. So does he deserve to be a dishonorable mention? I think just the fact that he causes so much hate and discontent among Cap fans is reason enough for the mention.
Yeah, definitely. I would say can be mentioned. And he, you know what? He'll be back. I don't know how soon, but he'll be back. Some writer will come along and say, "Hey, you remember that guy? I'm going to go ahead and bring him back with some amazing story." I mean, Englehart brought characters back. Brubaker brought characters back, so he'll be back at some point.
Yeah.
I'd say he's a dishonorable mention. And he didn't make my top 10 list. And maybe the not only for the longevity part of the criteria, but you know what, we already got William Burnside on the list. We already have another version of Steve Rogers on the list. I don't know if there was place on there for two.
Right.
And yeah, and God knows when we post any of the issues in the flashbacks on the Facebook page, the amount of disdain that story got, I know we should just move on.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, so I got one for you that I struggled with this one for a few reasons, but back in the early 80s, actually maybe mid 80s, there was this new villain that was going around and would kill other villains, other bad guys even, and would finish it with saying, "Justice is served."
Yeah, I love that catchphrase.
Scourge. And the thing about Scourge was now Scourge actually, I think the first appearance was actually in an Iron Man back in 1985, but very quickly made it over to Grunwald brought the character over into Captain America. But there was more than one Scourge, right? I mean, they wore these long white trench coats with a white skull mask and a, and a big old white hat.
Yeah. You kind of look like that. Remember the Mad versus Mad spies in Mad Magazine? Yeah, you look like that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, without the pointy nose, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that was, it was really cool back then in the 80s, right? Because there were some of these, I won't even call them B list. I mean, these were C and D list characters that that had been established, and they were sitting around. No one was using them. Mark Grunwald said, "Hey, I got an idea," and Scourge of the Underworld would go around and he killed a bunch of these C and D list characters, and so it got your attention. It definitely got. But then a Scourge would die, and then there would be another one that would take its place. So I think and this was back in the issues of Cap. I'm going to say 317 through 320. That was the first story, and then there was like an issue 347 was Scourge 3. But Scourge 2 appeared in like issue 362. I mean, it got a little confusing after a while, but there were a bunch of them. So I guess that's why I didn't want to add it to the top 10 list, because it almost fell underneath a group, like a Watchdogs or something like that, because there was more than one of them. But definitely, I thought needed to be in the dishonorable mention.
Yeah, definitely worth mention. He's been around enough that he rates it. Yeah.
All right. I think
all right.
We got one more, and then we'll wrap this up. One more that we feel is a pretty good Cap villain, but didn't deserve to be in the top 10. Who do you got?
Yeah, and I hesitate to even call him a villain, but he's done enough damage that I think he definitely deserves consideration. And I'm talking Frank Simpson, aka Nuke. Now, I know a lot of guys, don't like Nuke. Maybe some guys don't think he is villain material, but he's done some crazy stuff. Now, his first appearance was in Daredevil 232 back in July 1986. He was created by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. And he's another one of those sort of super soldier sort of spin-offs, the guys that didn't quite make the cut, didn't quite work out in some way. And he's kind of he's been described as a partial cyborg, and he's got this subdermal mesh under his skin that allows him to deflect bullets. He's got a second heart that allows him to have increased stamina. So he can go toe to toe with Cap pretty well. But here's the cool thing about Nuke, right? He has these different colored pills, these red, white, and blue colored pills.
Give me a red.
And, yeah, give me a red, right? Yeah, everybody knows that phrase, right? So the red sort of amps him up, right? And then he's got the white pills, which sort of counteract whatever the previous pill that he's taken, and then the blue pills sort of chill him out and relax him. But it was revealed in a subsequent storyline that those are just placebos. They don't actually have any effect whatsoever on Nuke. So it's all sort of a psychological effect. So this guy is cracked psychologically speaking. So, but it was in his appearance in issue 233 of Captain America where Cap has that famous line, "I am loyal to nothing but the dream."
Yeah,
and that's in that that sort of dialogue with Nuke. So Nuke he's briefly mentioned in Captain America 333 when at that time General Hayworth is discussing some of the more recent attempts to replicate the super soldier process. And apparently the first of those attempts was Nuke. And he talks about the sort of Nuke story that unfolded back in Daredevil. And he refers to a second failed experiment, a guy by the name of G.I. Max, who was accidentally shot and killed by his own commanding officer back in issue 331. So that was the previous issue. But the story I think that sort of endears Nuke to me as a dishonorable mention is in volume 7 of Captain America, issues 11 through 14, where Cap goes toe to toe with Nuke, and where in issue 14 he has perhaps one of the best Captain America speeches of all time, where he talks about the fact that he himself is an immigrant, and you don't need to be afraid of foreigners. And that cover of issue number 12 in this run is just out of this world. I think one of my favorite Cap covers, with him and Nuke duking it out on the cover. So I mean, a lot of folks may not think of Nuke as a villain per se, but I think he rates a dishonorable mention for sure, because every time I see him, I enjoy the interaction between Cap and Nuke, because they do represent different sides of the patriotism coin.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting as far as adding him to the list. I'm a big Daredevil fan, as you may know, and he's my number 2, up to Cap. And I really loved that story where he was introduced by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. It was a great story, and Cap shows up at the end of that story.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so when I see Nuke, I still think of him as somehow I associate him with Daredevil, but I get that he's more associated with Cap now, kind of like because of the military super soldier type of background. So I could see where he would be someone that may be up for consideration, but yeah, not a top 10, but a dishonorable mention.
I think one of the things I liked about Nuke is that I think Cap honestly feels bad for him, right? Because Cap's like he's like a big brother, father figure to soldiers, right? I mean, he has a soft spot in his heart for soldiers, and Nuke has just been a guy that has been abused and twisted, and I think every time Cap beats the crap out of him, I think he feels bad about it.
Yeah. Well, that was fun talking about the dishonorable mentions and, of course, our top 10 list. So we want to hear from the listeners. What do you think? Do you think we nailed it with our top 10? Did we get the not only the top 10 right, but did we get the order correct? Do you feel that any of the dishonorable mentions should have made the top 10, or did we forget somebody? Did we leave somebody out? I know that, there's a lot of Tumblr fans out there. So let's, talk about villains. Next episode, we are going to review Flag Smasher's origin in Captain America 312, and then the follow-up story, which is 321, 322. So we'll cover those 3 issues by Mark Grunwald and get into the origin and early stories of Flag Smasher, because we do think he's a pretty interesting character, and also is going to be involved in the upcoming Falcon and Winter Soldier Disney Plus series. So would love to get some more information on that. So that about does it. Just want to remind everybody, please, if you are on Apple, please rate the podcast. Please give us 5 stars and drop a review. And also don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, even though you can always count on us having a new episode out every Wednesday, New Comic Day. But we do appreciate your help with the rating, the reviews, subscribing, and helping grow the podcast. It means a lot. So as always, Bob, it's been fun wrapping Cap with you.
Yeah, it's been a ball. I mean, it's been great to think about some of these characters that we haven't thought about perhaps in years, and struggle with who belongs on the list and who doesn't. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what the listeners thought.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm Rick Verbanis. He's Bob Lucius, and we'll catch you next episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.